Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. It's content must be thin, eh, boys, to bring me on. An ode to the old Hartford Whale. No, we're in. This is. I did one of these a few weeks ago, and it was. It became the staple. People wanted to name it, so I can't digest some of the names that people came up with, but it's staying now.
What was the winner then?
Starts with an S and ends with an N. No, M. M. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness, for me, and I don't know if this describes anything, but it's like been watching a bad movie in slow motion, and that's kind of what this has felt like for quite some time though. And but the one thing is, I don't know about you, but doesn't it feel like there's a little bit of glimmer of hope
Yes.
with every day that comes on. I feel optimism is the thing that now we used to be a glimmer, now it's becoming something, and so it has been different. There's no question. I was actually, we had to sync our computers, and I had to go into the office for a brief moment, and you have to go in there with masks, and you have to scrub down basically to get in there, and it was really eerie being in there. And I hadn't been in there for a month and a half because we have to stay away. But I missed it. I really missed it. And the new normal now is life. It's 24 hours with your family, and for me, though, it's been outstanding just in the sense that when you go on a road trip and you're gone 10 days, 2 weeks, and you come back and your kids look different because they've actually grown. Where our kids are 9 and 11, so they're at that stage. And for me to be a part, and whether it's homeschooling or whether it's throwing the lacrosse ball around outside or doing some stick handling drills in the driveway, it's just been a lot of fun to be a part of. And that part I've enjoyed, but I'll be honest, I really missed the competition of competing on the ice with in the league.
You talked about the optimism, and the one thing I personally, and I don't tell anyone else how to think, but I just refuse to believe anything other than be optimistic. I mean, I think it's easy to get overwhelmed by negative thoughts now. And I don't know about you, John, but my belief is, look, if the medical professionals say we can't play, we can't play. If the government say we can't play, we can't play. But if they give any kind of an opening, I believe the league is going to, and the players are going to do everything they can to play. Do you disagree, or do you see it the same way?
No, I 100% agree. And even in talking with some of our players, you think about. I've heard comments. Actually, I may have heard you say this. It was or Jeff about I'll never complain about going back to work again. And you have some tough days, and it is a stressful business that you're in, but it it's our life, and it's that's what they're programmed to do. They're programmed to compete, they're programmed to entertain, and they're programmed to win. And it's when you take that away, it probably is a little bit akin to when guys retire. And everybody always says the first year out of the game is the toughest. Well, gosh, it's been for the first 2 months out of the game for us and for everybody, and with no end in sight or what it's seen before, it's tough. But I'm definitely on the half or glass half full type guy, and so I like the way the direction's going. It's going to be a little bit different, of course, but I think we'll be back sooner than later.
Fingers crossed. I think we're all on the same page there. Your team's given us plenty of conversation fodder all season
Yeah.
long. The start was the start, and then when this team hit its stride, it was spectacular to watch. And as much as us in media talk about that Battle of Alberta game, that Saturday night hockey night in Canada, here we go, it's rock and roll time, and it's the game of the year. I'll tell you, right before the pause, there was that Saturday game, you guys and the Boston Bruins. For me, that was up to the pause, the game of the year. It had a playoff intensity. It had, one team that was sour about what happened the last time these two squads met. Take us through your recollections of that Saturday playing the Boston Bruins. And what is Cirelli thinking going after Chara?
Well, that's what makes Cirelli. There's no. I would say if you were to take all the games of my NHL career in any hockey, playoff games reign supreme. But that felt like an upper echelon playoff game. And being in Tampa, rivalries grow out of playoff teams you play in the playoffs. But we haven't played a ton of teams in our division. Last year was one and done against Columbus. The year before, we played Washington and New Jersey. Boston was the lone team we played. We've never played Toronto. Detroit was so we haven't really built a ton of these rivalries in their division. But Boston and Tampa have seemed to be the two teams of late that have been atop of the standings, and there is a history. And whether it's the infamous lick, whether and it's all these things that play into it, overtime games, playoff series, which we were extremely fortunate to win. The next year we don't get through, and Boston goes to Game 7 of the finals. There's a pretty good bite. The core of both teams have been the same, and there's a lot of familiarity. And so when these teams go at it, they go at it. And that game, especially Saturday night, it was a litmus test, and it was who could puff their chest out farther. We had not been as a group had a team built that way that could handle those games, and it was kind of a test for us. But Boston didn't back down, and both teams. As you brought up Cirelli, that's a big tiger to tangle with. But everybody was in it together, and I think if there's any chance, who knows how this one's going to play out. But our games with Boston are some pretty intense ones, and it would make for quite a series.
John, you're a big movie guy, and there is a movie line everybody who loves hockey knows, and that is, we're putting on the foil, coach.
Yeah.
Before that game that night, did you see your players putting on the foil? Did you know that was coming?
No, we didn't. I can be completely honest. We were we've been playing some pretty decent hockey, but it was the new group. We had a bunch of guys hurt. Coleman and Bogosian had just come in, and Goudreau, and so everybody we were still trying to kind of find ourselves a little bit. Now, did we check this one on the calendar to say, okay, let's look at this road trip, because we had Toronto right around the corner as well, so we knew that these were going to be big tests for us. But to play with that intensity, that growl, that blatant disregard for your body in game. What would it have been? 68. I mean, usually those are, the refs are in the corner having a butt while the game just goes back and forth. And, but that was an intense one. And I'm sure their guys enjoyed it. I know I don't really read a ton about post-game press conference or comments after the game, but out of both teams, there wasn't, guys weren't mad at each other. Guys, it was more, that was a hockey game. And that's probably why both teams, enjoyed it so much, and there wasn't carryover. It was just two teams competing.
Elliotte's sick of me talking about Anthony Cirelli on the 31 Thoughts podcast. So, John, I'm going to let you talk about Anthony Cirelli instead. There are sulky trophies in this kid's future, true or false?
Well, I'm biased, obviously, but all I do know is that he has a tough assignments every single night, and every time. If we don't win the game, we don't come into the locker room and say we got beat by the top line that Cirelli was checking. And there's one thing, he's earned so much respect in our locker room and our team just of how sometimes it's tough to do the right thing. And if there's not a player in the league and not a coach, probably including myself, that has cut a corner here and there. But with Anthony, he probably cuts less corners than anybody if he cuts them at all. And he's always on the right side. He's always, there's that time you're out of gas and you just want to reach and lift the stick. Just jump on the other side, lift the stick, and hope. Hope's not a strategy with him. And he'll just take that extra stride. He'll dig that extra cent or whatever it is to make sure he steps in front of the guy and take him out. And they're ugly plays. They're the hard plays. They don't make them themselves. They were way onto the front page of the paper, but they sure make you win hockey games. And that's probably what the Selke's all about. And the one thing about the Selke, though, it is a little bit of a reputation. The guys that win it every year deserve it. Yep. But there's a bunch of years probably before then that they could have won it, and you got to find your way into that conversation. And when he starts finding his way in, which I think he is now, that might be something he can attain.
You know what? So I'm going to tell the headline writers just out of this: Cooper, Bergeron, and Kopitar win reputation Selkies. Is that
okay? Like I said, those. If there's an award, let me explain this one. So Patrice, actually, let me give you a quick story about Patrice.
Okay.
I've got to know him a little bit over the years. We're at the awards ceremony last year. No reason to rehash what had happened to us, but we're back in the green room before we're all going to talk to the media, and the season had just ended for him a couple days earlier. Mm-hmm. He went out of his way to come over to me and genuinely, like, handshake, look in the eye, and he was like, "Hey, how you doing? Are you okay?" And then but a second, like, no, seriously, are you okay? Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, what a class act. And I looked at him and said, "Are you okay?" Because I've been, he's won a cup, but we had to sit there and have a small discussion of what was worse, the way we went out or the way they went out. And because I've been to the cup final, and is it ever an empty feeling when you go all that way and you're so close and tasting it to have it taken out of your hands? And so it was a conversation I'll never forget for him, but for him to come out of his way and say what he did, it was he's a class act. And to go back to that award, I think that the Selke Award is probably the most respected award in the game. And naturally the best players take those, but the guys that the Selke is kind of the unsung hero award, and those guys all deserve it.
All right, let's get a Facebook question in from Ryan. What's the difference between coaching Stamkos and coaching Kucherov?
To be honest, not a lot. They're elite players. I always say that it's as a coach, you treat everybody fair, but you don't treat them all the same. And those two guys, you're learning from everybody. But as a coach, you're kind of a people manager. You're managing a group of guys. But those players, they see things that others don't. And I'll tell you where you really get to marvel at those players of their stature is when you're on the bench. You're not on the ice. You can go to video and say, "Hey, why'd you do this?" or "What happened here?" And we talk about those things. But to listen to them on the bench, especially, Cooch doesn't say much on the bench, but Stamkos, he's like a coach. And so he sees when things happen. There'll be too many men on the ice. And you're watching the game and you're coaching, but the first two guys that'll jump up and say too many men will be Stamkos and Cooch. Like, they know what's going on out there before other guys. They can see. They'll see, if a penalty should have been called, or if there's an offside or would have been offside, or little intricacies of the game, because they've got minds for it. And so when you've got elite talent like that, they're fun to coach, but you don't have to coach them too differently because they think a lot alike.
For the and it's normal, and I shouldn't be a surprise when you have a team with as much elite skill as Tampa's had for the longest time now. Tampa was always guilty of the extra pass in the offensive zone. How do you get that out of the game? Like, when you have so many superstars who can do whatever they want with the puck, how do you tame that tiger? How do you say, guys, we can't pass the puck into the net here?
Well, rewatch the video of games 1 through 33 this year. And that's almost how you do it. And the one of the balances, I love coaching a great team, and you can sit here and say, well, you go down and coach some of these other teams.
We have a freeze.
We have a freeze on John.
All right.
Get John to reconnect her. He's about to give us a really good answer, it sounded like.
We will get back to it.
We will.
We'll pick it up in the middle.
You have a quick thought on Tampa as we wait for John to stop by. That was, I think we were all, certainly Tampa is considering, the nature of expectations this year for the team. But this is a team, despite the last two losses, they lost the Maple Leafs and Detroit right before the pause. But this was a team that had hit its stride during the season. And to me, that Boston game was like, that was Tampa saying, that's it, we're ready for the playoffs.
Well, it was a great game. It was fun to watch. It's a Saturday night, so we're watching that in addition to our hockey night schedule. And very rarely on Saturday night does a game between two U.S.-based teams capture our attention. But that one certainly did over the games. I look at Tampa. One of my buddies said to me that he's mad he may have gotten cheated out of a Tampa-Toronto first-round series.
Oh, really?
Yes. He wanted to see Tampa-Toronto first round. And he's annoyed that it didn't happen or it may not happen. Maybe it still happens. Like, we don't know what this is going to go. And I like the fact he said at the beginning he was optimistic. But I had a buddy. He was mad. No Tampa, no Toronto, head-to-head. Furious.
That's if you're the Tampa Bay Lightning, because as John mentioned off the top, they haven't really had a chance to build any playoff rivalries here with any Atlantic Division teams. If you're Tampa, do you have a preference? Boston or Toronto in the first round?
Well, I think you have to want to play Toronto, right?
Do you?
Well, who wants to play? Who wants to play the league's number one team in the first round?
I understand all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. You still think that the default is the Toronto Maple Leafs with all that firepower and all those question marks going into the playoffs?
Sure. I mean, they have great players. Toronto does. Real talent. But the bottom line is Boston's the number one team in the league. You're taking Toronto over Boston.
As we stand by for John Cooper.
Oh, there he is.
Do we have him back?
Yeah, there he is.
Hang tight.
No, so yeah, I got you. So what we'll do is we were in the middle of the answer. Talking about
how we pass ourselves out of games.
So games 1 to 33, you were talking about.
Okay, we good?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. So games 1 through 33 was a trying experience for us, and the balance as a coach is you don't want to snuff out the talent you have. And it's you want to make that talent blossom. A lot of times you have to meet halfway with some of these players because there are certain responsibilities you have to have. But one of the things for us, we're a puck possession team, but there are times when you like there's dangerous parts of the ice, and one of the things with us that would get us in trouble was we wouldn't be satisfied to win a game 2-1, 3-1, 3-2. It would have to be 9-2. Mm-hmm. And so our team is blessed with some wonderful skill. But there are times when, chipping a puck by and getting it deep and being on the right side when it scores at a certain juncture of the game. And it took us a little bit to kind of warm up to that. And as soon as we started finding our way in that regard, our game took off, and probably post game 30, because we weren't playing all that poorly in those first few games. We just weren't getting the results, but we knew it was coming. And once after, I would say around game 30, things really took off for us, and we've been a much more responsible team.
Okay, so here's something a little bit different. let's imagine you are sitting at home last week in Tampa Bay, relaxing, do whatever John Cooper does at home, sit in front of the whale, and Tom Brady walks into your house. What would you have done?
Ooh,
Like Byron Leftwich's neighbor.
yeah, so as a football fan,
Yeah.
I grew up on the West Coast, and so it was the Raiders. But I would actually, if Tom Brady walked into my house first of all picked my job off the floor, I would actually, the one thing I'd always want to ask Tom Brady is about the relationship between he and his coach. That's one thing that's really intrigued me in how an elite coach and elite player have bound a bit together and found a way, no matter the roster they had, to pull it all together. And once I got out of the that would be the one thing I'd want to ask him.
Do you know Belichick at all? Have you ever had any kind of interaction with him?
I have not, and he's. My only interaction with him of late was watching him feed his dog after they took their draft picks.
A couple of things here. I want to get to more YouTube questions and Facebook questions, but take us through John Cooper on March 11th. So it's a Wednesday night. You've just played Toronto the night before. You have Philadelphia coming up on the Thursday. It's become one of those where were you when moments. For me, it was working with Elliotte and Berkey doing Wednesday night hockey, and all of our intermissions, the end of a pregame show in a lot of ways as well, all became about the NBA and what was happening and what this was going to mean for the NHL. Take us back to John Cooper on Wednesday, March 11th.
So I'm a bit of a hockey junkie, and when the season's going on, I don't have an off switch, and I have to watch the games. And that's been one of the weird things is being here and having no sports on. But I will watch those late games. And the big decision for me was, does the TV go on in the bedroom, and do I upset the warden, or do I have to go downstairs and watch the late games? And I remember, turning on to watch the late game. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Ottawa was playing.
Yeah, they were playing LA, I think.
Yeah, it was Ottawa and LA, and I was watching that game, and so I was probably a little late to the party. And when they announced that the NBA had stopped, you knew. And so the text messages are going around, but it was kind of late, so I wasn't really communicating with too many people. I communicated with, Julian, and we'll say, well, we'll see what happens. And when I got to the rink in the morning, and then I went there early, I don't know, it was probably not that early, but like 7:30, something like that. And when I didn't see the Philadelphia trainers there, because the opposing team trainers are always, the two equipment staffs are there early. And I remember wheeling in and they weren't there. And then that's when I knew there was something was going to happen. And then just that you could see when the players started filing in, their heart wasn't in it. And then you just knew.
A question from YouTube. Who's an underrated player on the Lightning that doesn't get as much credit as they deserve?
Oh my gosh. And I wouldn't put Cirelli in that anymore, because I think he is, he's getting some credit. Let me throw. I'll throw just some things out there, like whose games have changed. Mikhail Sergachev has taken a big time step. He gets a lot of, probably his name's bantered around because he was part of a big time trade.
Yeah.
But boy, has that kid elevated his game in this year. That we're really seeing the fruits of his labor. I'll tell you one guy that I'll give you two that have made an incredible impact on our team. Are Kevin Shattenkirk and Pat Maroon. And they were both late ads in the summer, both for different reasons. Both probably came in with a little bit of chips on their shoulder, but their attitudes and their way to add life into a different kind of life into our locker room was something completely unexpected. When you're looking and saying, what are they going to add on the ice? But I had Pat Maroon when he was a junior, and his maturity level, it's amazing how that kid has grown and what is winning a Stanley Cup has done for him and the aspect of growing a team. but to go on the other side of things, I'm just trying to wheel through our team right now. Some of those the young, like an underrated player who's come in and would be like a Mitchell Stevens, somebody that started in the minors and really didn't have any inkling that he was going to be up here long term, and all of a sudden now he's played between 30 or 40 games for us. So I look at those guys that really wasn't on the whiteboard at the beginning of the year, but have found their way in to erase somebody in and write their name in there. And so, but like I said, so many players in our team have helped us get to where we are. It's tough to not just single out one.
I covered Sergachev a lot when he played with the Windsor Spitfires, and one of the things that I used to always laugh about is him and his head coach, Rocky Thompson, who's now with Chicago in the American League, used to have these marathon ping pong games, and they were legendary. They were the two best table tennis players in the Windsor Spitfires organization. Can anyone on Tampa hang with Sergachev at the ping pong table?
The only guy I can throw, I can't believe I'm going to throw his name out, but is our longest standing employee in the Tampa Bay Lightning is Nigel Kerwin. He's our video guy. And he used to have, you ever get Marty St. Louis on, talk to them about their epic matches before games, on game days, not right before the game, but on game days, the two of them. Marty was a big time ping pong player, but Nigel would be probably the guy that I know of that would give somebody a run.
All right. Good answer. Dougie on Facebook. What's the biggest difference between coaching in the American League and the National Hockey League?
Well, the one thing is the players need you in different ways. When you're in the American League, they really need you. Everybody needs you because you're their catalyst of pushing them on to the next level. In the NHL, oftentimes, and the players need you for different reasons. They don't need you to move them on anymore. They need you, tailored onto the fact they want to make you better, but they want you to lead them to a Stanley Cup. And so there's a big difference in what is needed. The more there's probably, I think both, it's miscued that the American League's a development league and the NHL is not. The NHL has become a development league. Mm-hmm. There's so many young players in now. It's no longer, hey, you've made the NHL, you've made it. You got to develop the players just as much as you were doing in the American League. But there's probably, in the big picture, there's more people managing going on in the NHL. You're managing not only down, but up. Because you've got a lot of people you have to answer to, general managers and presidents and owners, and then you're managing your whole staff. There's equipment. There's the staff is tenfold bigger in the National Hockey League. So a lot of the managing is probably the biggest difference between the two leagues.
Got a question for you about coaching. You're going to be going on the Coaches Association Global Clinic on June 8th to 12th, and now doing it online because of everything we're going through. Registration, by the way, opens Monday, I should mention.
Nice plug.
Yes, and you're on
NHLCA.
Yeah, the NHLCA. You're on the panel with Rod Brindamore and Pete DeBoer, the head coaching panel. If one of you guys had to arm wrestle
two lawyers and a cup winner.
Yeah, that's right. So if one of you guys had to arm wrestle Brindamore, you or DeBoer, who would have the better chance of winning?
I think Pete and I would say, okay, this is going to be a 2 versus 1 here. We'd be both the guys holding on to his arm as Brindamore is having a protein shake while he takes us down.
Is there any advice you'd give out there to aspiring young coaches? There's always people out there, men and women, who want to coach. What would you tell them?
The biggest thing about me for coaching is coach for passion. Don't coach because you feel like you have to do it or because your kid is playing. I think the best coaches do it because they love to do it. And the one thing for me is it's not about wins and losses. When you get into the professional ranks, yes, does that dictate your future? At times it does. But I don't believe that if you're coaching strictly for wins and losses, you're going to be doomed as a coach. It is all about it's about the culture, the environment you build. I always say this. My biggest excitement is starting with 23 guys in September and making them one by June, and it's that the passion of the how do I say this? The development of everyone.
The journey.
That is it. It is the entire journey,
Mm-hmm.
and not so focused on the buzzer. And when you can do that, and like you never look at a clock a day in your life, and there's so much more fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always curious about this. How elite level teams like yours, how they function in that market, and if that team was in another market, how would they do? How much of your success, how much of Tampa's success, is because you play in Tampa? Like, I think of a situation, that Ottawa game earlier on this season. Kucherov gets sat down for the third. Again, here we go with Anthony Cirelli, but he scores in overtime. If that's in any Canadian market, that is a fire, and that is discussed and pounded nonstop. How would you coach if you had the same team, exact same roster, but you weren't in Tampa, you were in Montreal? Would it be any different, John, in your estimation?
I'm sure. I'm sure in ways it would be. I look at it two different ways, and ironically, that game was against a Canadian team.
Yes.
By televised by a Canadian station, but you're not thinking that when those things go on. But so when you're in Tampa, people say, well, nobody's really watching down there. It must be so much easier to play. But you can look at that two different ways. You can look at it, well, maybe your foot's taken off the gas. Maybe if you're playing in Montreal or Toronto or somewhere where people are watching all the time, maybe players can be a little bit more focused, and you're getting more out of players in that regard. There's a little bit more pressure on them to perform. And why do players, why is the playoffs so much competed for so much harder? Because there's more pressure and there's more to play for. And I think when you're playing in a media market, everybody's watching. The other part of that, though, it can be a drain on players. And we all know that in some of these cities, when a city latches onto a player in a positive way, it can be a wonderful thing. But if they do it in a negative way, it can be so detrimental to a player and on a team. So I think it takes a certain type of player to be able to play in those markets and survive. I think there's players in there that thrive on it. I think he doesn't play for me, and I might be completely wrong on this one. But you look at a player like Max Domi. He was playing in a Sunshine State and having a decent career, but he really seemed to turn things up when he went to Montreal. And I think there's some guys that crave that, and there's some guys that don't. But the big thing for me is you got to keep the guys with their eyes on the prize and not looking at you got to make sure all the things that are going around you are white noise, because that's probably what can get you in trouble.
So just as a follow-up then, so what is it about Tampa? I know the knee-jerk from some circles might be, guys want to play there because of the tax situation. That certainly is an obvious perk, but it's got to be more than that. This was a wildly successful organization. What is it, John, in your estimation, about Tampa?
Well, there's a number of things. The obvious ones are the taxes, the weather, the location, the quality of the team. But I really think everything is a product of what happens at the top, and it just filters its way down. And I think ESPN, they do every single year, they kind of rate every sports organization in North America. And I think it was 2016, 17, one of those years, the Tampa Bay Lightning were the number one team in all of sports. And they rank on ticket prices, ownership, management, players, playoff, all these things. And Tampa, the Lightning were rated number one. And that starts at the top. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, Steve Yzerman, Todd Leiweke, and Jeff Vinnick, who kind of started all this. And now it's been picked up by Steve Griggs and Julien BriseBois. And they've taken another step forward. And there's so much more to Tampa than just the hockey team. How philanthropic Jeff is, and who gives away $50,000 every single game in his entire tenure as the owner. Even when there was a lockout, he was giving $50,000 away to charity. And I think there's so much equity built into the community. It filters down to the players, and when the players, everybody talks, and when they, word comes around of how they're treated by the organization, it makes it a pretty good place to play.
Here's my last one for you, John. I'm assuming a number of your players have stayed down there while this has been going on. Have you been driving/walking around, standing in the driveway? I know Kucherov has a setup, I believe, in his driveway. Have you had much like, hey, I'm coming over for a beer or something, or I'm coming over to watch you shoot pucks, Cooch, while this has all been going on?
No, I have not. I'm not. I've watched Alex Killorn do his little doc talk and cruise around and talk to the players, which has actually been which has been pretty cool to see. But no, I think a lot of the guys have stuck to their own group. I know they get on Zoom calls and there's communication, all that stuff with the players. But the one thing is, a lot of our players have stayed. I think we've only had a couple that have left, but they're in communication with each other. But the guys have taken it to heart. They've stayed away from each other, and we've got a close team too. So they've obviously learned from this. But I'll tell you one thing: I went to the office the other day to sync my computer up, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to get a good weight workout in here," and the gym was completely raided. So like everything's gone, all the weights are gone, the bikes are gone. And so I start making calls around to the players, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I took that bike and I took these weights." And I'm like, "Oh, should have done my homework before I thought I was going to go work out in there."
John, the last one to me. I just want to hand the floor to you more than anything else. Obviously, a lot of Tampa Bay Lightning fans are watching this, listening to this as well. As a closing thought or a closing comment, what is your message to Tampa Bay Lightning fans watching this right now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's one thing. I've been so impressed with what has happened since this pandemic has started and what's happened in Tampa and in Florida as general. I know Miami's been hit pretty hard, but we had spring break going on down here right when everything was started. The beaches were packed. There were so many out-of-towners down here, and everybody has taken this to heart. And we have, yes, do we have cases? We do, but did we blow up like everybody thought we were, especially being a cruise ship port and everything that's gone on? Yeah. We haven't. And for Tampa, the community as a whole, Mayor Jane Castor, everybody has been phenomenal of what they've done. We have a passionate fan base here. I went to the grocery store the other day, and I must have been stopped by 15 people. Just great, so excited for our team and what might be able to happen, and thanking us for what we've done and the support the players have given the community, what Jeff's given the community. But this group of fans here loves their hockey, and all I can say is hang in tight. The nurses, the doctors, everybody that has been giving their time and their life to make sure that this pandemic is in somewhat control are truly unsung heroes. And we will be back for them, because I think, sports, you can say what you want about it, but it is a rallying cry. And it's a rallying cry from everybody of all ages. And for us to be a tiny part of it, I can hardly wait to get back and play in front of the fans and hope give them a little bit of joy that's been taken out of their life the last 2 months.
Great.
You're a thoughtful guy. You're a great coach, and as we see behind you, you're a wonderful interior designer. Thanks so much for spending 40 minutes or so with us today, John. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. And like I said, I've learned two things. I've learned about since this quarantine. I've learned what Zoom is, and I've learned what podcasts are. And I've tuned you guys in. I found out that 31 Thoughts had one, and you guys do a hell of a job on there. Keep it up.
Appreciate it. Thanks, John. All the best.
All right.
And all the best to Tampa Bay Lightning fans who joined us today. On behalf of Elliotte, Friedman, and our entire crew, Jeff Marek signing off. We're back on Tuesday for another edition of Ask 31. Have a great weekend on the horizon.